recording. Well, welcome everyone to our online presenters November 2019 Speech-a-thon. The year is moving very quickly and we have a wonderful time this year, and we continue to have these great speech-a-thons that we can focus on some of our longer, bigger projects. Today we have two special sections, and today this first one, I need you to put on your thinking cap. Imagine you are invited to be a member of a focus group to help policymakers in an imaginary little country to figure out whether they should prepare a bill concerning assisted suicide. Now, this country has a high standard of living and free universal health care, which has led to a situation with an increasingly older population with lots of expensive physical and mental health problems. Many of these folks live with serious pains and many suffer from loneliness and a feeling of being useless and worthless. Now, if they were capable of ending their lives, and if it wasn't such a taboo, they might choose to do so. An increasing number of them already commit suicide or at least try. But not everyone is capable, and currently, they cannot get any help from their doctors and friends to end their lives because these would risk a lengthy prison sentence for assisting in a suicide. Well, therefore, the policymakers have been discussing whether any citizen should be provided with a suicide pill in certain circumstances. For example, at an age of 70 with certain kind of incurable diseases, so that they could use it to commit a suicide. It might be comparable with an abortion pill that is now being used to prevent a new citizens from coming to the world. Now, but before launching any public hearings on this idea, it is being tested in a small focus groups. If it would be preferable if the focus group could reach a consensus on this, whether the policymakers should proceed with this idea, or if not, and why not. Now help me welcome our moderator, the Ministry of Health and Human Services, Joy Knudsen.
Thank you. Thank you, Lois, Graham, Grishan, Jim, and Tiger for having accepted to be part of this important focus group discussion. I hope that in the next 70 minutes, we can create a consensus of what this group would advise policymakers to do with assisted suicide legislation. We all know that currently assisting somebody in committing a suicide is a criminal act and can lead to long prison sentences. And it would be important to discuss whether this legislation could be replaced with a more liberal one. But first of all, I would like to hear from each one of you very briefly whether you have any experience among your friends or relatives or acquaintances on this issue, and where you ever have thought of it. And could we start with you, Lois? Do you have any?
Thank you, Joy. I have never personally been involved in this. However, I have followed the Brittany Maynard case in Oregon quite closely and have had rebuttals and statements about this particular issue.
Okay, thank you, Louis. What about Graham? Any experience or thoughts on this?
As a journalist, obviously, I've covered this issue because it is, in fact, your mythical country that you're speaking about could well be Australia, a rich country with universal health care and an ageing population. I've certainly looked at the issue from a personal perspective. Both of my parents passed, one of them quite suddenly, so it wasn't an issue. The other had cancer for a number of years, and so it was definitely an issue which was discussed and considered within my family.
Thank you, Graham. What about you, Christian? Any personal experience?
Personal experience with suicide with the elderlies. No, but I have two personal experience with one close friend of mine when I was at university. He had a very bad love relationship and he tried to end it. He went emotional. He went high on sleeping pills. But luckily for us, we had a team of medical students, and they were there in time. Second experience was myself when I was in a very, very, very bad place. And I considered it for like a whole week, but thank God I had the support system. I had good friends who took me out of it. And I think it comes down to the environment you live in, whether you're a young person, a teenager, a mature adult, or an elderly. It comes down to the environment you live in.
Mm. Thank you, Christian. I'm so happy you are around here still.
So am I.
Yeah. And then Tiger, any personal experiences among your acquaintances or friends?
Well, as most you know, my mom just died, and it was getting to the point where we were going to have hospice. In the United States, they get around assisted suicide by giving people morphine drips, which is just once you put someone on a morphine drip, they're going to be dead within 24 hours, 48 at the most. And I had personally been involved in that conversation with the people from hospice as to when we were going to get to that point. So my mom, fortunately, took the decision out of our hands and died in the middle of the night. So we didn't have to go through all that. But yeah, that was it was it was a pretty intense emotional conversation, but I was all for it. At some point, people are suffering. There's no need. I mean, it's silly to me because we put animals down, but we can't put humans down. It just doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Tiger. And you, Jim? Any experience?
Hi, Joy. Actually, yes. Several years ago, I had a close friend who was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. He was given about a 10% chance of surviving it. He did all the right things. He did the surgery, did chemo, did the works, but he told me that ahead of time that if it did not work, that if his quality of living was diminished, that he was going to commit suicide. And I decided that I was going to support him in that. That was his decision. That was something that he could do. I would talk with him about it a great deal, but if that's what he wanted to do, I was there for him. As it worked out, he survived. His quality of living is great, and so it wasn't necessary, but we did discuss it.
Thank you, Jim. So, about this possible new legislation, what advantages would you see there could be if such a legislation would be prepared? Who wants to go first? What could be the benefits? Graham.
The obvious benefit is that, and we just heard Jim speaking about quality of life. If somebody is suffering a terminal illness and is going to be in pain, or their quality of life is going to be so poor that they don't wish to continue, the legislation which is being discussed would allow them to take that option. What concerns me is something that Christian was saying, and it's the slippery slope argument, I guess, that if you pass legislation for people who are suffering from a terminal illness, how do you then disregard people who wish to end their life for other reasons? And had assisted suicide been available in the case of a young person who believed they had no quality of life, or that they were facing such a circumstance, yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable, because it's going to be difficult to draft legislation which meets both of those points of view. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Tiger, what would you say to this?
Yeah, I agree with Graham. I think there would have to be specific criteria established. There would have to be a mental counselor, a doctor, you know, at least one or two official representatives of the people, you know, a son, somebody involved, so that there would have to be a consensus of medical professionals, people involved in this person's life. And again, it would be tricky, but having been both involved with people who have committed suicide and people who wanted to die because they were suffering, there has to be in place some pretty strict regulations. Thank you.
Yes, Lois.
Yes, thank you, Joy. So I've done a lot of research on this, and there is this act that's in the United States. It's called the Death with Dignity Act, and it was actually created and started with Brittany Maynard, who had an inoperable brain tumor and had less than 6 months to live. And she lived in California, and she ended up moving to Oregon because they have the Death with Dignity Act. And in answer to what Tiger is saying, the Death with Dignity Act says that you have to have a prognosis of less than 6 months to live. So now you have something that is definitive and you have prognosis on that. Plus you have to go to 2 different doctors, psychiatrists, to get them both to sign off that you are in your right frame of mind, you understand everything that's happening. And when you're asking what are the benefits, well, there's a number of benefits. There's your peace of mind that you're able to take the time to go when you want to go. If you know you have less than 6 months and you're going to be a vegetable, in Brittany's case, she had a brain tumor. They had told her she was going to be a vegetable, and that was it. So mind would be completely there, but she would have complete paralysis. So does she want to be a burden on her family, both emotionally and financially? And so when you read some of these stories and why you're letting this happen, it's a financial issue, not just for the individual, but also for the government, who sometimes has to drop in and pick up the bill on some of this stuff. And it's also the quality of living. If I know that I'm going to be a vegetable, do I really want to be that burden on my kids and my husband? Isn't it my right to decide how and when? So I think, yes, you definitely have to have some definitive diagnosis. I think you do have to go to the psychiatrist. You do have to get that signed off on. And with the Death with Dignity Act, there are other options that you have to go through, or other things that you have to go through to be tested before you can just get this pill. And if you've never read the whole Brittany Maynard story, I encourage you to do so. It is so eye-opening. Joy?
Does anybody want to respond to this, the financial issues? And yes, Graham.
There's something that I just heard actually disturbs me a little. And when we start considering, do I want to be a burden on my family? I don't much care about the financial burden so much as do I feel that I'm a burden on my family? And again, that gives us the difficulty that there can be pressure on people not to be a burden on the family. I don't want to be a burden on my family is one thing, but do you want to be a burden on your family? The pressure from outside can lead. There have been cases in Holland, for example, or sorry, the Netherlands. There have been cases where older people have felt societal pressure to seek assisted suicide because they feel they are being a drain or a burden on their family. And so I think we have to be really careful that that doesn't happen. I did notice that Christian was going to say something. I'm not sure whether I'm cutting across his bows there, though.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Chris, on this point?
It wasn't specifically on the point that Graham raised. Was on what was shared previously by the panelists. I would think the best way would be to identify the cases in which people are, if they want to go for the option of suicide, for example, terminally ill people versus emotionally unstable people versus teenagers out of love. So if we could identify it on a case-to-case basis, and then we'd know which category of people would be, and I'm going to use this word very carefully here, would be entitled to have the suicide option. But then the next option, the next step would be, ask the person, do they want to really go forward with it? Because when I was listening to Lois, I remember, I don't have the details, but I remember of this lady. She got married. She had a first child, a daughter. When the daughter was 4 years old, she got told that she has stage 3 cancer, and it's going to evolve very soon to a stage 4, I think. And she had like a maximum of 4 to 8 months to live, something like that. And they asked her, what do you want to do? And any other person not out of that situation without a child to raise would say, okay, I'll leave the next 4 months or 8 months to the best of my ability. And if it's too painful, help me end it. But what she did was she lived on. And when the daughter graduated from university, only then that she passed away. So it also comes down, like, even if a person meets the requirements, all the requirements to be eligible for assisted suicide or to get the pill, they may at some point have a turning moment and say, no, I'll just keep on going because of that reason. So it's something to always have at the back of the mind, because there's no one case that is like the other. All cases are to be treated in a unique fashion. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Christian. Jim, do you see any solution how this could be solved? I mean, that there are so many different circumstances and criteria that people are mentioning about this.
And that's one of the problems with a law, with any sort of legislation, is that it by definition has to be specific, and yet it's very difficult to come up with specific circumstances that apply across a broad range. I think a waiting period would also be an important factor in all this. If someone decides to do it, the problem is that they may be in the heat of emotion when they make this decision, and they're going to regret that decision later, or at least they would have if they had the opportunity to. If we had a requirement that may be like a waiting period to buy a gun, if you have a waiting period before you can get the suicide pill or something, that would give people the opportunity to actually think things through.
Thank you. Louis, what do you want to say?
Actually, I'd like to address both Christian and Jim on that. Christian, I completely agree with what you're saying. The one thing that the pill does is it gives you the peace of mind. It doesn't mean you have to take it. And if the treatments that you're going through are beneficial and it's working, you never have to take that. But if it's not working and you feel there are no other options, your peace of mind is there that you have it. Jim, in comment to you have to have a waiting period. If memory serves correct, in the Death with Dignity Act, you have to have at least 6 months in advance of when it is, even though they're saying you have this terminal, because you have to go through so many tests and so many other things before you can, it's not like you just walk into a doctor and he hands you the pill. So there is a waiting term. And as a matter of fact, Brittany had to wait 6 months before she could do anything, because she had to move to Oregon, and Oregon requires you to have an electric bill or some kind of proof that you've been living here for at least 6 months before you could even begin to see a doctor. And that is one of the things that they do, is they make sure that this is all, they not only talk to you, they talk to your family so that they know that everybody is on the same page and that you are in your right frame of mind when you're asking for the pill. Doesn't mean that you're going to take it. It's when you're asking. So that's another thing that you need to consider. But yes, a waiting period is an absolute.
Thank you, Louis. So now we have heard a lot about drawbacks and something about benefits. of such a legislation. But if you have to decide, is this the right time in our history, in our country, to start preparing this kind of legislation? What is your opinion on this? Should we stick to the existing legislation that criminalizes anybody, any doctor that is trying to help his patients to commit suicide, or should something else be prepared? Who would like to start on this? Graham.
I'm a supporter of dying with dignity, with allowing people to make the choice. But I think we need to be able to codify what we mean by that. In Australia, for example, doctors quite regularly hasten death. And that was something that Tiger was talking about earlier, where if treating the illness will bring forward death as a side effect of that treatment, then that's acceptable. That's the giving somebody increasing doses of painkiller, even though that will bring forward the death. And it's
Graham, I need to interrupt you. Yes or no? Do we go for the...
Yes, but with caveats.
Okay, Lois? Yes or no? Is this the right time to go for the legislation?
Yes, ma'am. We've already got 9 states in the United States that have approved it. And I think if you put it on the agenda, you will find that most of the states will.
Thank you, Lois. And Jim? Yes or no?
Yes, our current situation is not working. The
Thank
legislation
you.
needs to be done.
Yeah, and Tiger?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. And Christian?
Yes, but with a scrutiny on a case-to-case basis.
Okay, thank you very much. So we reached the consensus that this is the time that such a legislation should, that we should advise the policymakers that they should start preparing such a legislation. But obviously there are lots of caveats and lot more focus groups and public hearings to be done to nail down in what circumstances and what criteria to be used, because this is not a simple issue, even though we had to, at this point of time, just decide whether to go forward or not. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this focus group.
Thank you very much, Joy. It is a tough topic to discuss in terms of life and death situation. And it is something that all of us at one point or another has to deal with, whether it is part of our own life or the lives that are around us. So thank you for that, not only for doing this project, but picking this topic, even though it is an imaginary country. It is a topic that all of us have to contemplate at one point or another. So thank you very much, Joy. And I look forward to Tiger's evaluation of what he thought that went through. We are stepping into the second segment of today's meeting with Nick. But before I do, just a quick note, any of you who are wearing these headphones with a speaker, a microphone, if you found your volume to be breaking or not, maybe just moving it away from your mouth just a little bit further, and it would help a little bit. So this is, I see Tiger has a little bit, Christian a little bit louder on your end. Joy, you sounded fine earlier. Just trying to see if we can get as best of a recording as possible as we dive into Nick's project. A little bit lighter, I would say, in terms of topic, just a little switch. And that the whole thing about being a foot in being in two worlds. We are in the virtual world and the physical world at the same time. And Nick's got a question he wants some answers to. He wants to know, is social media the answer, or is word of mouth the answer to growing our club? So help me welcome the moderator for this segment, Nick Lacani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster of the Day. It gives me great pleasure today to kick off this panel discussion. And the reason for that is that I want to find out how we can do our PR better. Not just for this club in OP, we live in the online world, but also in any of the bricks and mortar clubs that you're interested in. To me, PR, the job of the Vice President of PR is to actually get more bums on seats in every meeting. That's it, that's the bottom line. That's the metric that is the most important one. However, over the last few years, there's been talk of different ways in which to attract new people in to visit our clubs. Now, when somebody visits our club, I think they're blown away and they love it, and they really are encouraged to join, and they want to join. But how do we get them there in the first place? There are 2 or 3 options. Today, I've got 3 panelists. First panelist is going to be Lois, who's going to be talking to us about social media. The second one is Graham, who's going to be talking to us about word of mouth. And the third is Jim, who's going to talk to us about a possible alternative. And I just can't wait to hear all 3 of these people. Let me just go to the first one now. DTM Lois Margolin has been an officer in at least one of the clubs since she joined in 2012. She's currently a member of 2 bricks and mortar clubs, 1 online club, and 1 hybrid club. She is the president of Online Presenters, and which she helped to charter a few years ago, and the treasurer of Outspoken Toastmasters. She's been a vice president of membership over 10 times and has sponsored over 88 people. Lois's latest accomplishment was coaching a club with 4 members to 21 in under 5 months. Let's learn Lois's secrets in using social media in public relations. Please welcome Lois Margolin.
Thank you, Nick. I think this is a fascinating question. Is it your personal touch or is it social media? Yes, I have sponsored over 88 members, and I expect within a year it'll be over 100. The question is, how do you do this? Well, I started with word of mouth, no doubt about it. Maybe I got 15, 20, I'll even say 30 people from word of mouth, people that I physically touched and said, you need to come with me. But after a while, word of mouth isn't going to cut it for someone like me. I'm going to need to rely on social media. And here's the thing, every area has different social media needs. Instagram doesn't work for any clubs that I follow, and here's why. Because the only other people that follow you on Instagram are other Toastmasters. No one else follows you on Instagram. Is that something you really need to spend a lot of time on? Probably not. But where are you going to get the biggest bang for your bucks besides putting your name on the chamber and putting it in the newspapers and stuff like that? Well, it's one thing that is absolutely free and something that we don't even need to deal with, and that is the Toastmasters International website. Each club is on Toastmasters website, and what's so important about this is that you have a link here that goes to your website, but most importantly, you have a phone number. Now that phone number goes to me, but it's not my number. That is a Google Voice. And why is that important? Because when I am no longer involved in membership, that phone number stays the same and we just forward it to someone else. And that's incredibly important. So when I get that phone call, what do I do with that person? Here's where that personal touch will come in handy. Because I could just say, yes, show up at our meeting and that's it. But I will usually take 10 to 15 minutes to talk to someone about why do you want to join? Why now? What is Toastmasters expected to do for you? Then I give them a tip. Here it is. There are 3 ways to determine what club to join. Number 1, can you make the meeting? Is the location good for you? Is the time good and the day of week? Number 2, when you walk into that club, does it feel like it's your safe place? that you could say whatever you need to and feel you're in a good spot. And most importantly, number 3, when you walk in and you see that member that you can say, oh my gosh, when I grow up, that's who I want to be, that's the club you need to join. Ask yourself, if not here, where? If not now, when? This is the club you need to be in. In the same token, I'll promote all the other clubs in Coral Springs because we have 4 of them. I don't care what club you join, just join. And that has been incredibly beneficial because I hear over and over, you know, I've called all these different people and you're the only one that took time to talk to me. Okay, so let's say they don't find us on Toastmasters.org. Where else is a great place to find someone? Well, it's free also. It is called Eventbrite. I spend a lot of time tweaking Eventbrite. And what I like about Eventbrite is it's free. It shows people what we do. It links to our website. We have a phone number on there. So there's all kinds of things they can do. And for you Toastmasters, you're probably seeing a lot of power of 3 here. Afraid of public speaking, promoted to management, starting a new business. We all know how powerful the power of 3 is. Learn more about presentation tips, business networking, and public speaking. We will get anywhere between 4 or 5 people that will email us that they are going to this event. What do we do with that information? Well, we send them back an email and then I add that personal touch. I'm going to save you a seat. And what does that do? This person now feels committed to showing up at that meeting. If they aren't going to show up at the meeting, 75% of the time, they will call me or email me or text me and say, I can't make it, I'm so sorry, can I come next week? That's the power of connection. But let's not just talk about the brick and mortars, because I will say our Online Presenters Club does a phenomenal job on Facebook. Facebook promotes different speakers and it gives a 1-minute snippet of somebody's speech, and then we provide them more information if they'll follow us on YouTube. But more importantly, one of the things that Online Presenters does for us is it actually shows a visitor different tips. Welcome to online. Here's how you work an online presentation. Oh, wait, you want to look at how to set up a studio for a live video? Or you want to learn something from a past world champion? Our website is chock full of information. So the question is it that one-on-one touch or is it social media? Well, you can start with that one-on-one touch, but after a while, you're going to run out of friends and family and relatives that you're stagging and pulling and dragging to that Toastmaster meeting. But if they find you on social media, it is your responsibility to make that connection and make it count. And make sure they know that you care about them as an individual and that you will be there saving them a seat when they show up. Nick, back to you.
Thank you very much, Lois. I really appreciated that. What I loved about that was when Lois said, which club is for you? Can you make the meeting? Is it a safe place? And oh my God, I want to be like that person. I thought that's the biggest takeaway from me, as well as finally the personal touch. So well done on that, Lois. I really appreciate that. Now, our second panelist is going to talk about word of mouth. Graham is a tech geek and social media maven. He should logically be a strong advocate for using social media to promote Toastmasters. But as he will explain, sometimes the tried and trusted remain true and remain just that, tried and true. Please welcome Graham Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Facilitator. I'd like to tell you the story of 2 clubs. One, Speak and Jest, which, as the name would suggest, was a specialty club, a comedy club, a club which had, I have to tell you, a district director, or at least a district program quality director and a district club growth director as amongst its members. And it had been struggling for some years. In fact, it was down to 8 members about 3 years ago. The club was set to fold. I ran, amongst other things, a workshop amongst the club members asking, did they wish to continue? And if they were going to continue, were they willing to commit to continue? It was the sort of panel discussion which we've seen here tonight. Fortunately, the members said, yes, we want to continue. And so they set out a plan. So that's one club. Now let me tell you about Brisbane Speakers. It's a club which has at last count 32 members, and I believe has another 2 members who are set to join. This is a club which did not exist 3 years ago. Why did it not exist 3 years ago? Because it is what Speak and Jest became. Essentially, one of the things that Speak and Jest decided to do was to go back to its roots, to go back to being a Toastmasters club which appeals to the community. It moved location and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. But the way that it grew is what I want to talk about here tonight. Yes, it had a website. Every Toastmasters club has a website, but most websites, most Toastmasters clubs, whether they're Free Toast Host or one of the other things like Easy Speak, frankly, they don't work particularly well. Yes, it had a Facebook page, but again, it didn't really work all that well. What it did have, though, was enthusiasm amongst its members. And those members went out and approached other people and said, hey, look, we'd like you to come along to an open house meeting that we're having, where we will demonstrate what Toastmasters is about. There was a little newspaper publicity, there was some social media, but most of all, there was word of mouth. Because any advertiser will tell you that spending money to get people into your business is all well and good, but word of mouth is the most effective way of getting people to become regular customers. Can I ask a question? Of the, what have we got here, 12 people that I can see, who here joined their first Toastmasters club at the personal invitation of a friend or relative or neighbour or a fellow Toastmaster? Can I get a show of hands? Who here came along because they spotted something on Facebook? Who here came along because they looked up Toastmasters on a website somehow, on the Toastmasters website? Why did you look up Toastmasters? Because somebody had told you about this organisation. Nobody goes to the internet and types in a random word, Toastmasters. You have to have heard about Toastmasters before you can begin to look for Toastmasters. Social media is a wonderful thing, but at the heart of our involvement in this organisation, somebody told us about Toastmasters. Somebody told us about how we could improve our communications and public speaking. Word of mouth remains at the heart of what we do. We shouldn't ignore social media because, quite frankly, anybody under the age of 40 is much more likely to be reading social media than they are their local newspaper, particularly the free local newspaper, which gets thrown over the fence and then thrown straight into the garbage bin. But at the heart of any publicity campaign are the people, the word of mouth that is required to create the awareness which social media, which advertising, which traditional media can synergize with. But at its heart, Toastmasters is about people sharing the experience of learning to speak. That's why Toastmasters is much more effective than almost any other form of communications training, and is certainly more cost effective than any other form of communications training. It's because the people who are the members of the club are enthused about what they do. If your club is not enthused, if your club is not excited about doing what it does, then no matter how you get people in, they're simply not going to join. At the heart, word of mouth is what it's all about. It's the people who are involved in our clubs telling other people about what it is that we do that makes them come along and that makes them stay. Mr. Facilitator.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you. The biggest takeaway for me from your submission was you must have heard of Toastmasters before looking up Toastmasters. I love that. Very, very powerful. And what you talked about was at the heart of the club and at the heart of the message, the energy and enthusiasm of the members. And it doesn't matter whether it's a virtual club, a physical club, that you need to have a growth mentality. So I really appreciate your time, Graham, and your words. Thank you for that. Now, you may have noticed in the chat, I've asked for some questions, and you can take part too. So send your questions by direct message to me, and then we're going to actually be able to ask some questions of the panelists, or even you can actually make some statements as well. So send that to me personally, and then after the next panelist, we can go and discuss. Our third panelist today is going to be Jim Barber. He's going to talk about an alternative to social media and word of mouth in terms of having effective PR for our Toastmaster clubs. Jim Barber joined Toastmasters in 1989, the same year that the World Wide Web was first proposed. Since then, he's seen many changes in the internet, in Toastmasters, and in the word in general. He's here to suggest a new direction in PR that clubs should consider. Please help me welcome ATM Gold Jim Barber.
Thank you, Nick. Let me start by saying that I am a big fan of both word of mouth and social media. I'm not advocating replacing them. They both work, they're both important. However, word of mouth has worked for centuries, literally centuries, and that's part of the problem in there, where we've gotten used to it. Social media is newer, but even social media has been around for 10, 15, 20 years. And so in terms of nowadays, that's getting a little bit, we're getting used to that as well. I'm proposing something new. Now, both the social media and word of mouth have a common problem, and several people have alluded to that, in that we've got to get people to the Toastmasters meeting. Neither social media or word of mouth is going to do it. With the idea is to get people to the Toastmasters meeting. And I think I've got a way of doing that that is a combination of the best things of word of mouth and social media. It's a horrible, horrible word, but hear me out. I think we need a commercial. Now, you may be thinking, oh, well, we've done that. We've had a commercial. We've had people coming on screen saying what I liked about Toastmasters. No, that's not a commercial. That's an information video or something like that. I'm talking about a short, entertaining, standalone video production that happens to carry the Toastmasters message along with it. But it's not selling Toastmasters. It's selling entertainment. I'll give you an example. If you've been on the internet in the last few days, you've probably seen a video. If you haven't seen the video, I guarantee you're going to see it in the next few weeks. And it is E.T. returns home after 40 years. He comes to visit Elliot and his family. It is an adorable little 4-minute video. That's why I have E.T. over here. It is an adorable little video, and it is a commercial. It's a commercial for Xfinity. I'm happy to give them a plug. They went to the expense of producing this. But you don't see Xfinity pushed anywhere in that. It's an adorable little story about E.T. coming back and revisiting Elliot and his family. And at the end, it says, brought to you by Xfinity. That registers in its mind. That's what I'm proposing that Toastmasters needs, not another informational video where we trot out the talking heads and people say what Toastmasters means to me, but a tightly scripted, very well produced commercial that is entertaining on its own and that would go viral on its own. And after people listen to that, they're hit with some sort of a message that says Toastmasters is the way to conquer your fear of your fear of communication, or to solve your leadership problems or something like that. But don't sell them with the commercial, sell them on entertainment and then lead that into Toastmasters. That's my proposal. Again, it's not social media alone. It's not word of mouth alone. It's an extension beyond those two. This is not something that can be cranked out very quickly, but it is something that I think is worth at least the investment of considering it. Nick, back to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. I really like that. I have no idea where you were going with E.T. there, but it worked, I feel. Go for the commercial. So what you're doing is you want the commercial to help somebody know, like, and trust Toastmasters and use social media to actually make it go viral. So best of both worlds. Love it. Fantastic. Now we've had 3 panelists. Now it's your turn to ask your questions and have your say. Now the first question I had a little while ago was Saikishore. Saikishore, please unmute yourself and ask a question and direct it to one of the panelists, please.
This question is a combination of the 2 strategies that we have discussed, so it's not directed at one particular person. My question is, we talk about how our Toastmasters experience is in social media and the word spreads. So the positive word of mouth spreads, and that's how people get to know about the club. So that is also word of mouth. So where do you find a demarcation or a distinction between what is word of mouth and what is social media? I feel that whatever passes on, spreads in social media is also a word of mouth. So do you say word of mouth is only physical and rest all digital is social media? So how do you find a demarcation?
So Lois, would you like to take that first one, please?
Certainly. I interpreted word of mouth as being something where I am going one-on-one to someone and actually bringing them into the fold. To me, if I just heard the word Toastmasters 5 years ago, whatever, and today is my day that I'm going to start public speaking, will I remember the word of mouth? Maybe. Will I remember the word Toastmasters? Maybe. That to me isn't word of mouth. Word of mouth is Jane took my hand, she walked me into the club and said, hey, this is what you need to do. We all hear these different things. You hear John Maxwell, you hear this, you hear that. Is that word of mouth? I don't know. That to me is publicity. That is a commercial. That is not necessarily the way it's going to go, because if I'm interested in doing public speaking, I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to Google public speaking. And I did look it up, and Toastmasters is in one of the top pages that you can go to get the top 7 or 8 tips about public speaking. And from there, it just kind of moves on. But I look at word of mouth as a personal touch.
Thank you for that, Lois. Graham, well, what's your take on Saikishore's question, please? Thank you.
Lois has convinced me. No, seriously. I still maintain that the individual member's experience is at the heart of what causes people to join Toastmasters. And I would still argue that most of us come to Toastmasters because we have been told about Toastmasters. I agree with Lois that the days of having somebody physically say you should come along to Toastmasters, which by the way is how I joined. I had a colleague said, you really should come along. it would help you enormously. I know that that's perhaps less effective, but I still think that the commercial that Jim was talking about is only going to work if people are already primed by word of mouth to understand that there is an organisation called Toastmasters which does what it does. So you'd be stupid to ignore any option to try and promote your club, which is at the heart of this discussion. How do we promote our clubs? You would be stupid to ignore anything. What's interesting, I guess, is going to depend on what scale you put on each of the components.
Thank you very much, Graham. Now, we have a couple more questions, so I'd like to just ask Carol. Carol, can you ask your question to the panel, please?
Certainly, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Communication theory includes several dimensions, mode being one of them, such as face-to-face, email, social media. Another is frequency, the message itself, and formality. Today, we spent a lot of time talking about mode. How frequently should a person communicate their desire to have you come to their meeting via either face-to-face, social media, or commercials? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, talking about the mode, why don't we ask Jim, how often are you wanting to run this advert for Toastmasters or this commercial? Jim?
I think the idea is not that it would be run any particular kind of way. It would go with, if it's done well, it would go viral. I've shown the ET commercial to 2 people since I saw it because it's just so darn cute. I wasn't promoting Xfinity, it just happened to come along for the ride. And I see a commercial being that same way. If it's well done, and I'm not saying we have to use ET or anything like that, but if you do a commercial that is entertaining, then people are going to recommend that their friends see it. Oh, you should see this. And at the end of it, it talks about how the benefits of Toastmasters. But it's not a thing of running it on television. My understanding of it is if you're below 30 years old, you don't watch television anymore anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Graham, you've got to follow up on that?
I just wanted to respond to Carol's question about frequency. She raises an interesting issue. As mentioned, communications theory is first, you have the method of spreading the information. You also have the frequency. The more often that you ask somebody to come to Toastmasters, there reaches a point where you risk being seen as, oh God, they're going to talk to me about Toastmasters again. Listen, I got to go. So, there is a risk that word of mouth can become obsessive. But again, I would stress that you would be silly to ignore it in conjunction with other methods of seeking public relations or publicity, at least.
Thank you, Graham. Lois, very quick point before the last question.
Very quick. Carol, I would say once there has been a connection, I go for 3 touch points. The initial connection when they've reached out to me, at the meeting itself, and the follow-up afterwards. And then if we're having something special, I might do a 4th one in 3 months. But 3 touch points for me without being harassed, without really going overboard, has the highest hit rate.
Thank you. Thank you, Lois. Now, we've got time for one more question. Christian, you've actually posted 2 or 3 questions. Why don't you give us 1 question and direct it to one of the panelists, please?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So this question goes to Graham. Apologies for the nature of it. So word of mouth limits you to the persons in your network. Social media, if well planned, allows you to reach over 1 billion persons. With these 2 facts in mind, do you still vouch for word of mouth over social media?
As I said before, I've actually been convinced by Lois on this one. But I would argue that you still need to use both. And you need to use advertising if you can afford it. I'm sorry, by the way, Jim, but anybody who tries to come up with a viral video is already doomed to failure. The simple act of trying to create a viral video almost certainly dooms it to failing. But yeah, I think Lois is right. Social media probably is more effective, but I would still look to do word of mouth because we're not ashamed of what we do.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you for your questions, everybody. And I'm sure if you wanted to, you can actually directly send a question to one of the panelists, either on the chat or by email afterwards. I'd just like to wrap up with in terms of what we heard tonight. I felt we heard 3 compelling arguments. I felt we had a lot of information. I felt we had a lot of experience being shared with us tonight. And I really appreciate our panelists today, Lois, Graham, and Jim. Please give them a big hand. Thank you. And to our Toastmaster of the Day, Roger, and our evaluator, Carol, who may or may not be able to speak later on, I'm not sure. So please give them a big hand. Thank you. Now, in terms of my final words, for PR is about getting bums on seats in your meeting so you've got a chance of converting them to become members. That's the bottom line, in my opinion. You can talk about the fluff, you can talk about the magic and all of this kind of stuff, but when it comes down to it, that's what you're judged on. What are you going to do in your club? You may be an officer, you may be VP PR, you may be a coach, you may be a mentor. What are you going to do differently for your club moving forward? If something is not working, what are you going to suggest? Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster of the Day.
Thank you, Nick. It is a interesting question or discussion of how to use these various different ways to promote not only our clubs, online or offline, but any of the causes that we believe in, and stretching it out to things that we care about. How do we reach to the greater public? Let's dive right into our evaluation. We will first have Tiger evaluating, giving us some feedback on Joyce's session, and then Carol on Nick. Let's keep it as tight as possible with our time because I know it's a Saturday, I don't want to keep everybody. So Tiger, take it away.
Thank you, Roger. So first of all, how is my audio? Am I okay here?
You're okay.
Okay, good. So Joy, excellent job. First of all, you did a good job of recruiting your panel. I know you spent a lot of time asking people. I know that you sent me several emails recruiting me, encouraging me, hopefully, and got commitment. So excellent job on that. You approached a subject that is anything but heartwarming, in reference to the ET character. And then you took a huge risk by asking people for their own personal experiences. Now that could have been really dangerous because people may have gone off 2, 3, 4 minutes. But being that we're all Toastmasters, you did get excellent responses that were short and brief and to the point. Your questions were very well scripted. The one thing I really appreciated about it, your questions were direct, easy to understand, easy to answer for the most part. You did not, during the entire time, offer your opinion once. And that's one of the biggest faults I see in this type of thing is the person has all their own opinions and they want to interject. Well, that's obviously not their job. And you did an excellent job with that. And kind of on a humorous note, at the very end, it was excellent. You said yes or no. And how many people said yes or no? Nobody said yes or no. It was yes, but, or no, but, it was funny, but I loved how you just said yes or no. Let's just wrap this up. And I was going to make a comment about Graham, but I'll just let that go. I don't think he's capable of saying yes or no. Sorry, Graham. Just a little Australian humor there. So anyway, an excellent job. The only recommendation I have is in your preliminary, like with your emails and stuff, you may have wanted to put out a little notice saying, please keep your responses to 30 seconds or less. And then again, reminded us as we started. Like I say, you got away with it because we're public speakers and we all have respect for time. But I could see a discussion like this getting out of hand really quickly, and your timing was perfect. I mean, you stayed right within your time frame, which is very, very difficult to do in such a intense type of discussion. So overall, just an excellent job. I really appreciate what you did. It was a good example to someone else that wants to try and do this speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiger. Now let's turn it over to Carol and let's get her thoughts on that second segment from Nick.
Thank you. I loved you as a moderator. Wow. There were some things in particular that I enjoyed. One was that you asked your audience to write their questions to you. In other words, we had to summarize it to be concise. And then you turned around and asked us to ask the question orally, which already pushed us to be concise. And you got the flavor of diversity with each one of us asking that question. I loved that. The second thing I loved was your conclusion, not because you were finishing it up, but simply because you had a wonderful summary. And then you asked this very open rhetorical question about what are we going to do? So you're pushing us to action. I like that very much. Areas to work on. Let me see. How do you control a person if they talk too much? And I wasn't sure if there was a way or a method that you had that would enable you to interject, to guide a speaker to control themselves a little bit more in terms of their answers in the Q&A section. I thought your selection of the panel was also very good. You had some excellent, knowledgeable people. I think Lois for the social media, top notch. And then with Jim coming in with a commercial, wow, nice and creative. And then to have Graham with the social, wait a minute, I got that backwards. Lois was word of mouth. Graham was social media. No, I got it backwards. All right, whatever. You guys know my notes are bad, but anyway, I thought your selection of panelists, and even though you were struggling to find them, I thought your selection of panelists were just so appropriate. I was glad to listen to their wisdom, and I'm glad that you brought it out. Now, Jim mentioned also the importance of not interceding with your own opinions and thoughts. You did a nice job of staying out of it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to our Toastmaster. Woohoo! Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to give a general evaluation / everything else. 3 points. Number one, here's a little trick. If you are looking for doing a chat box, instead of clicking on that every button and trying to look through the whole list as to the first person, which person's name and so on and so forth, you can right click the video square of the specific person and find chat there. It's much quicker that way, number one. Number two, this have happened a few times, especially when we are in a kind of impromptu situation, and especially during Joyce's segment on a little bit heavier topic, the ahs and ums start to come back a little bit more because we're kind of contemplating, talking about this point and this point. So be careful of that when those heavier subjects and you're more contemplative, the ahs and ums start to come back a little bit more. My last comments are on lighting, on contrast. For example, we see Jim Barber, great focus. He has a little bit of a redder shape on his face versus Asil, for example, a little bit on the whiter, paler side. Go over to Carol and Sakashore. They can use a little bit more lighting into their face a little bit just to have a contrast. And Lois, for example, visual is perfectly fine, but she have chosen a library background, which is a little bit darker. If she would have wore something lighter or brighter as a blouse, that would make a contrast. So think about contrast, and it will make it everything much pop out a little all the more. So with that said, I am going to close our meeting officially, and we can continue to have more discussions. So thank you very much to everyone.